I think I've gone through a lot of the stages of grief with this one, Alex. During the game, I'm texting with you and I'm ready to fire everybody besides Bill. I'm ready to blow the whole thing up. Then I got, into the whole roster building weeds and if the direction of the team, which is what I wrote about this morning on 98.5, uh, if we're heading in a good direction, not in terms of the talent on the team necessarily, but just in terms of the stylistic decisions that Bill Belichick is making in the way that he's building the roster. All these things being said, it's been a couple of days. We've had some time to calm down here a little bit and move on from this loss. Where are you at this point, Alex, with this team?
Yeah, I mean, I texted you after the game. I was pretty upset. I thought that was going to be the game that broke me, and I still don't know how I'm going to live in a world where Josh Allen shredded a Bill Belichick defense in the playoffs. But
Yeah.
yeah, it wasn't great. I think it's starting to come around a little bit, and I was somebody who was stressing. I know nobody wants to hear this, but see, year-long preseason and building blocks and year 1 of 4 and all that stuff I've been saying basically nonstop since August. It's kind of starting to come back to that. So,
Yeah.
it's a real jarring end. And
Always is.
I
It's like
I, I think there's a positive and there's one fact here that I think is a positive or a negative, depending on how you look at it. And it's something I keep coming back to. Football's a what have you done for me lately sport. And when Bill Belichick and the Patriots staff do their end of year evaluations, they heavily weight the end of the season. I've heard people say that the final game of the year can be as much as 50% of a player's final grade for the season. So you look at what that final game was, and
disaster.
you apply that philosophy, and you can look at it one of two ways. You can look at it either, I mean, I think there are some people who look at that and say, that's who that team really was, right? That's who the Patriots really were. It's not close. And I don't believe that. I think they had a really bad night at the worst possible time, and the Bills had a really good night at the best possible time. I think the Bills are ahead of the Patriots. They should be, right? They drafted their quarterback 4 years ago. There's not a 30-point difference between the two rosters. I truly believe that. But again, one side of that, 50% of the evaluation is this is who the Patriots really are. The other side of that evaluation is they were super aggressive last year in the offseason.
Yeah.
And I think that worked. I really, overall, whether some players were hits and misses, we'll talk about that plenty. But I think it's hard. It's pretty. I think everybody would be in agreement in saying overall, the Patriots 2021 offseason was a success. And I look at how pissed they must be and should be after that game. And I can't help but hope maybe we get a similar mentality again this offseason. And it's different circumstances. They don't have, whatever it was, the third most cap space in the league. They're projected to be about middle of the pack, I think slightly below that. And that's fine. I still think they have ways to maneuver. There's things they can do where they can be aggressive. And I'll go back to it here. All right. So that was year 1, and they checked a lot of boxes for year 1. Now it's time to get into those year 2 boxes. And I think that game kind of reinforced the fact that, hey, last offseason was good. This year was a good foundation, but that's all it is. It's a foundation. You're building a house. You don't just lay the cement and then be done with it. You have
Right.
to lay the cement. It's very important. You need the cement, but you don't just lay the cement and then walk away. You got to put up the rest of the house. So I think that game kind of, for better or worse, that game reinforced the fact that this team is in progress, but they are still a work in progress.
Yeah, so two things I want to piggyback off of there. Number
Yeah.
one, we opened the show on Thursday when we did the preview show. I was trying to remember. My brain is all over the place still. On Thursday, when we opened the preview show, we said, which Patriots team are we going to get? Are we going to get the Patriots team from the 7-game winning streak, or are we going to get the Patriots team that we've seen over the last month? And we said then and there that it could get ugly if the Patriots team that played in Miami and the Patriots team that played in week 16 against the Bills and week 15 against Indianapolis, if that was the team that came to Orchard Park on Saturday night, we were expecting them to lose, maybe not by 30 points, but to have it look at least 50% though the way that it did, right? Maybe I thought they were going to lose by a couple of touchdowns,
See,
kind
that's
of
the
like they
thing.
did in week 16.
I don't even think it was those teams, because the first game against Buffalo, or the second game against Buffalo, the Colts game, Miami, they started coming back.
Yeah.
This was something. This was that was. It's not the two different versions of the 2021 Patriots. That was the 2020 Patriots. That was
Yeah.
a team that was just totally helpless, turtle on their back in the sun.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that that's something that's a little bit alarming, certainly because you have to think about the inner workings and the leadership. And I'm not talking about Bill Belichick necessarily, but I am talking about the coordinator level, certainly, right? And you look at the offensive, defensive, and special teams coordinators, and I put coordinators in air quotes for the defense because who the heck knows who's actually running the ship there? It's kind of a combination of Mayo, Steve, and obviously Matt Patricia with Bill Belichick as the overseer. And you look at all these types of things, and I do think that you have to point to talent and you have to point to the fact that they were completely ran off the field and couldn't keep up with Buffalo as a big reason why, more so than maybe the schematic X's and O's of the game plan and what exactly they went out there and did on the tape. They played a lot more zone coverage than they did again in week 16. It wasn't as much man, but it really didn't matter, right? Like, it really didn't matter what the game plan was. They were just completely overmatched in this game by Buffalo. And I thought the interesting thing that Jacoby Myers said, he said a couple of interesting things, and this is where I want to go with it next. The first thing that I thought was really interesting that he said was everybody else or that were in the playoff hot that were contending in the AFC started to elevate their game as the season progressed. And Myers said that he didn't feel like the compete level or the buy-in diminished, but it never increased. It never got to that playoff level. It was always sort of the same baseline compete level, which was solid buy-in, but not good enough to elevate their game to that next sort of tier of teams. The other thing that I think is sort of what you said about the foundational year is when they lose like that, it's really easy to lose sight of the fact that this was year one of Mac Jones's NFL career. This was year one in the system for Nelson Aguilar and Kendrick Bourne and Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith, for big pieces of that offseason rebuild. And you got to learn from it. You got to grow from it. There's certainly other roster flaws and holes that they're going to have to fill to help out those guys and elevate the team in 2022. But setting this as a foundation, a 10-win season where you make the playoffs, isn't an awful place to be if you can use it as a springboard. And the team that Myers pointed out was the Buffalo Bills, right? A lot of those guys in that core in Buffalo have been around forever. Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, Tremaine Edmonds, Matt Milano, obviously the quarterback. Those guys have grown together as leaders, as teammates, as players in that system and in that culture in Buffalo. And I think the Patriots, I came away a little bit more hopeful today from talking to some of the players that maybe they can use this in that same vein. And maybe they can use this adversity as a jumping off point and cling to some of the good things that they did. And the next year they come back, everybody's in year two in the system, and it gets better, even better than it was the year before. They still got other holes to fill and other issues to work out. And we're going to get to that. But that's where I'm at now, is hoping that they can use this as that foundational year. And looking at some of these other rebuilds across the league, Rome was not built in a day, right? These teams
Right.
don't just flip a switch and go from being out in the playoffs to Super Bowls just like that, unless you sign Tom Brady in the offseason. But that's another point altogether. You don't really do that in the NFL. So a team like Buffalo is a great example of a team that stayed the course, that worked together for multiple seasons, and were able to eventually turn it around.
Yeah. No, I agree with all that, and I think Adrian Phillips, it was encouraging to hear him say straight up that making it to the wild card game, that's not the accomplishment. That's not
Right.
the end goal. It's so I think it's important that they keep that mentality. I don't know, like I was talking to Ted Johnson about this when I was on with him on the Sports Hub on Sunday about what kind of the mood is like after that game.
Yeah.
And I asked him how much they go back and they evaluate a game like that, because you're never going to face that Bills team again. There's no need to necessarily self scout that game in the sense that that Patriots team's never going to take the field again, right?
Right.
There's going to be so many personnel changes, but if I'm Bill, or if I'm a leader in that locker room, maybe not in the offseason, but day one of OTAs, everybody's sitting down. The first thing I'm doing is putting that game up, the highlights of that game up on the big screen to watch.
Yeah.
I'm bringing that back over. Like I'm making guys watch that before every game next year. Like that's the thing. That has the potential to like it's just so jarring the way the game went down. I think that game has the potential to be a defining game for this core. The question is in what direction? Is a
Right.
defining game in that they got to that point, they got to the playoffs in year one. It seems so encouraging. And then they just got beat down and they never recovered. Or is that the game that woke them up and let them know, hey, yeah, we won 7 games in a row. We thought we were it. And then we got our faces stomped in. Like that's how we learned. I think that so a couple things I remember. Obviously, the greatest Bill Belichick pregame speech of all time before Super Bowl 39, when he
The
just
parade
read the
route.
team the parade route for the
Right.
Eagles. Another one, and this is simpler, but the winners wanted T-shirts
Yes.
in I forget what year that was, but that was the slogan at the beginning of the year, winners wanted. And it was like a training camp slogan, and that goes away once the season starts, like late in the year. They brought back the winners wanted thing. So I think it's just something like that. I think it's something that you have to internalize that game. I think if you're the Patriots, you have to internalize that game and they can use it. There was
Yeah.
one other example, but I'm gonna remember it in a minute. But
Yeah. That's the
can't
way that
remember.
I'm
Oh,
looking at this now.
I
Right.
think yeah. So I can't remember the year. I want to say it was 2015. Um, the Royals were in the World Series, and I don't remember who they were playing, but they were a young team. And I know this is a different sport or whatever, but this is a sports philosophy I truly believe in. The Royals were in the World Series, whatever year it was, they lost. And after they lost, the majority of the players on the roster stayed on the field and watched the entire celebration.
Yeah.
The next year, the Royals came back and won the World Series. Like that sounds like a stupid anecdote. I truly believe there's something to that. That those guys stayed on the field and watched what happened and internalized it and it propelled them. I think this game needs to be something like that. And it can be something
Absolutely.
like that if they have the right
If
leadership
they
and they use
use
it
it
right.
right and they have the right leadership. Exactly. That's what I'm maybe a little bit more concerned about than what I normally would be in terms of this team
Right.
is normally I look at the leadership and I see Devin McCourty still there and I see Matthew Slater is still there. And even though he's lost a step, Dante Hightower, just in terms of his leadership and intangible qualities, Bill Belichick's obviously still the head coach. And I say, oh, they got great leadership. They got great foundation. But at the same point in time, that same leadership is what let this spiral out of control. And that same leadership is what let them put out that product on Saturday night. So, as much as we can sit here and say, we're not saying that Saturday night was a good game. We're not saying that this was good for the Patriots. We're just saying that at this point on Monday at 5:15 after the game, there's nothing you can do about it. They lost by 30 points and the season's over. So you can't go back and fix anything. So the only thing that you can do at this point in time is learn from it and build from it and hopefully use this season. And I wouldn't lose sight of the fact, if I was a Patriot fan, that this was year one in the system for so many of those guys on offense, a really complex offensive system, year one for so many of those dudes. And I do think that this is just the tip of the iceberg for Mac Jones. I really do truly believe in Mac Jones and think that he is going to continue to get better
Right.
and take steps forward. And we're going to talk all about this offseason, how the Patriots can help him do that. Right. And that's
Yeah.
where I want to go with this next.
So that's what I would just say. Like we're sitting here giving the rah-rah. And by the way, with the Royals, it was 14 they lost the Giants, 15 they beat the Mets.
Yeah.
We're sitting here giving this rah-rah, and like you just said, like Mac Jones is going to get better, and it's true, but it's not you snap your fingers and wait. Like
Right.
it's not Madden where your players just from year to 1-2 their overall goes up, right? It's an active process in terms of adding players, adjusting the system, all of that. So um I think that's important to remember. But again, I just think that game, again, it was so jarring. It has to have an impact. It's on the Patriots to determine what kind of impact it has.
Right, exactly. And the part that worries me a little bit about it, not to be all doom and gloom, but I think it was after the Colts game that Matthew Slater said we have some decisions to make in this locker
Yeah.
room about whether we let this get out of control or we dig in and we fight. Well, they let it get out of control. So this is something in the offseason that you do. If you're Mac Jones, you want this to sting. You want this to sit with you and you want to learn from
Right.
it and you want to remember the way that you felt at the end of that game. The other leadership thing that I just wanted to hit on real quickly here before we start to kind of turn the page here. Um, Mac after the game said something really interesting to me. He mentioned that he feels like one of the areas that he wants to improve on from year one to year two is leadership because he didn't want to step on anybody's toes in year one as a rookie. But in year two, he's hoping to improve on that. And he's hoping to help carry the team to where it wants to go a little bit more and lead the team a little bit more where it wants it to go. And I know that people have different opinions on Mac Jones in this game against Buffalo and different opinions about Micah Hyde's interception and who's at fault and all that kind of stuff. All that sort of stuff aside, Mac Jones came to compete in this game. I fully believe that. Like he came ready to go and compete against Buffalo. And I don't know if the rest of the team followed him. So the one thing that I'm looking for out of Mac, outside of all the tangible things that we can talk about in terms of how he can improve and all that sort of stuff, the one thing that I really want to see is him blossom as a leader. He's the quarterback of this team. And I was sitting next to Chris Mason in the press box, Mass Live on Saturday night, and I turned to him and I said, at 14-0, if this was Brady, and I know I hate to keep comparing him to Tom, but I'm just that's the gold standard, right? And if this is Brady, then at 14-0, Brady's going up and down the sideline and screaming bloody murder at the offense, right? Like, wake up, let's go. This is the playoffs. Like, don't go down like this. Let's step it up. Let's make this happen. Wake the heck up. And I'm not saying that Mac needs to go ahead and lose his cool on the sideline to prove to me that he's some sort of a leader. But I do think that the Patriots could use a little pissed off Mac Jones. They could use a little angry Mac Jones every once in a while and holding people to that sort of standard. And I think next year is the year where we start to see that a little bit more. Mac's a rookie. He's not going to do that now. But next year, I hope we get to see a little bit more of that kind of edge from Mac Jones, right? To be able
Yeah.
to help the rest of the team and pull the team. Yeah, Mac needs to go psycho Tom. That's exactly right, Robert. Right? We need to see that a little bit more. I think from Mac Jones next year.
Yeah, I mean, whatever his leadership style is, you don't want to force him to be Brady, right? He's going to lead how he's going to lead.
Right.
I know he's gotten some heat for being a little aw shucksy in the past, and I don't totally buy into that. I think maybe that's a little bit of who he is, but he's got to find a way to harness it. The good news is it doesn't sound like, just based on things he's said based on things other players have said this year. It doesn't sound like he's afraid to call players out, veteran players out when they
Yeah.
make mistakes in terms of like the actual X's and O's of it, right? And now that just kind of translates into the non X's and O's element of it. And I get maybe him hesitating doing that as a rookie. He shouldn't have a problem doing that now. I think that's the difference. It's we know he can hold other players accountable. We've heard from guys like Kendrick Bourne, from Hunter Henry, that he does that at practice. They run a
Yeah.
wrong route or the timing's wrong or something. Now it's just doing that with everything else. That's kind of the next step, I think, for him as a leader, right? What's the big Brady one where he's like walking up and down the sideline, like, we got to be faster, harder,
Yeah.
faster, stronger, faster, tougher, whatever it is, like
That's
that one. Like,
I'm pretty sure that was 28-3.
yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
I just couldn't remember the exact words.
Yeah.
That's kind of the next level, I think, in leadership for him.